You all for coming. Thank you, Amy. Wonderful. Well, welcoming everyone. I'm going to hand it off to my friend Tara to get us started. Thank you all again for coming.
We still have some people that are going to trickle in, but I wanted to welcome everybody to the launch of our Environmental Superheroes of the English Language Arts classroom. We are really excited to have you here. If you would please share in the chat your name and the organization you're affiliated with, that would be wonderful.
Thank you all. Oh, we've got a full spectrum of California just in the first 5 submissions. Wonderful. Nice to see the whole length of California represented here today. Thank you, Shelley, for joining. Wonderful to see you here. See lots of familiar names and lots of new ones. Thank you all for coming. So as everyone introduces themselves, we wanted to introduce myself. Or we wanted to introduce myself. Good grammar there.
Ourselves.
Yeah. So my name's Peggy Hart. I'm the Youth Education Program Manager at the UC Davis Center for Community and Citizen Science in the School of Education. And I'm also Callie's co-lead for our Professional Learning Hub.
And my name is Tara Kataniak, and I teach at Aldergrove Charter School and Cal Poly Humboldt, and I coordinate a community of practice for environmental educators up in Humboldt County. And I've been leading this working group. We've been working on this project for, oh gosh, since the fall. And so it's really exciting to see this all come together.
Also with us today, and I see a number of names as the chat has been scrolling through, we have 3 guest speakers with us today, our superheroes of the ELA classroom that we're going to be highlighting during our discussion today. So we're going to get to not only hear clips of the podcasts that these teachers helped us co-develop, but also get to hear from them, hopefully, if they were able to join us in person, recognizing this time of year at 4 o'clock, sometimes it's hard for teachers to get away. So excited to hear from our colleagues, either virtually or hopefully in person today. So our objectives today are really to think more about California's environmental literacy work. And if you are not familiar, introduce you a little bit to the California Environmental Literacy Initiative and specifically the Superheroes of the ELA Classroom Project. And we're also going to talk a little bit about some of the rationale and think about why we are focusing on using ELA as a through line for environmental literacy, but also ways that we can use environmental literacy as a way to really deepen and enrich ELA connections and skill building. We'll hear directly from some of our classroom colleagues, as well as share out some of their stories and resources that Callie has been putting together for us on our, yay, exciting Launching Today website landing page.
Our agenda for today, we've just introduced ourselves. We're going to introduce the work of Callie and this project. We're going to share out a little bit more about why environmental literacy in the ELA classroom. And then we're going to have an opportunity to share some of the podcast clips and have a brief discussion in the second half an hour.
So CALI, or the California Environmental Literacy Initiative, was founded by 10 Strands after California's Blueprint for Environmental Literacy was launched, and the need quickly arose in thinking about ways in which California educators can come together to really focus on collective action. And so CALI's guiding principles you see here on your screen are really focusing this collective action so that educators, from classroom educators, administrators, non-formal educators, community-based partners, can really all come together in a shared vision of what environmental literacy and environmental justice education might be able to look like in California's classrooms, and then use that collective action to really be able to make an impact statewide. So on the Cali's website, you can see there are a number of resources and working groups. Some of those resources we're going to get a chance to look at today. Tara and I are both part of the Professional Learning Innovation Hub, and our working group has been focused on making sure to round out not just resources connecting ELA and environmental literacy, but also be thinking a little bit about what some of those opportunities are with our upcoming framework adoption as well. So we really want to hear from all of you, give you a chance to get to know each other for just a brief minute, and really share what brought you today, what excites you about the idea of thinking about environmental literacy as a way to deepen ELA skill building and interdisciplinary work, and also what you might be looking for from this webinar and from these resources. So Amy is going to open up some breakout rooms. Feel free to join the breakout room that most applies to you. Oh, wait, never mind. They're all just numbered. We'll have about 5 minutes. So just brief introductions and then a discussion about what brought you here today. Perfect. And recognizing there is never enough time, and the introductions are always the exciting parts, getting to meet new colleagues in new spaces. But if you would mind pausing for just a moment and thinking about something you heard or something that really resonated for you in talking about what brought you here today and the why of doing this work. Given that we're a small enough group, if you want to add your why to the chat, or you can raise your hand and come off of mute and share aloud, either one, whichever one you're most comfortable with, either in the chat or just raise your hand. Yeah, wide variety. Yeah, thank you, Satina. Staying inspired. Thank you, Kurt. You want to go ahead and come off of mute while people are populating the chat?
Sure. Well, my why is because I think I have a lot to learn about this. So a very pragmatic approach. I'm very enamored of what we are describing at Cal Poly as convergent practices, meaning I really want to get into supporting language learning, math, and science at the same time, in part because I think it's a value proposition for K-5 teachers. Two, because I think it actually more accurately reflects the world. So I'm trying to get better about this because I got a great science background. I've got some meaningful skills around nature journaling. We were just talking with Nate about that. But I basically don't have any real training in English language learning and support. So I'm here to get that.
Wonderful. Thank you for coming, and some wonderful resources to be shared. Yes, Gavir, we will be sharing out some resources that Tara and I have been putting together. Yeah, interdisciplinary approach, interconnectedness. I think it's how we are seeing the world when we ask students to think about systems thinking, using and applying all of those interdisciplinary skills. And yeah, at the end of the day, Mara, staying inspired. You know, we are with and amongst friends who are all inspired by the same kind of work. And so wonderful to hear stories and then get energy and get energized from all of you. So thank you all again for coming. Hopefully we will be able to not only share out additional resources today, but we really see today as a launching point for this website and platform through Cali to really begin this conversation about some of the potential that this kind of work really holds. So thank you all. So at the core of a lot of this conversation are California's standards and California content and curriculum. The California Environmental Principles and Concepts were adopted in 2002, but it wasn't until the Next Generation Science Standards that they were built into our frameworks. And slowly, as each new framework has been adopted, the environmental principles have been added to and included throughout different frameworks. And so in 2018, in addition to the original environmental principles and concepts, a focus was really put on the addition of climate change, students understanding climate change, and there's been a lot of additional ed code and legislation that's come since then, focusing on the imperative of not only preparing our students for a deepening understanding of climate change, but also environmental justice and issues that are affecting their local community and ways that they are able to engage and have positive impacts. Because when we think about the social and emotional needs of our students, really right now, that ability to take action and make change, to feel part of the community, is so important. So California's environmental principles and concepts, like I said, were first included in the NGSS frameworks back in 2013. They have also been added to the history and social science, the math and the health frameworks. And now, right now, the ELA, ELD frameworks are preparing to be under revision again with the environmental principles and concepts included. So we really thought of these conversations from superheroes of the ELA classroom as a way to sort of launch us into that greater conversation about what those types of inclusions might look like as we prepare for California's revision of our ELA ELD framework to include this important topic. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of those snapshots and what that might look like as we really begin to launch this robust program through Cali. And like I said, California has a lot of blueprints and toolboxes and skill sets that we are building off of when it comes to ways to engage students in this type of work. If you go to Cali's, I think, Amy, we have another link, Cali's resources, there are a number of toolkits depending on your job or how you're working with different types of students. But it's really something that is missing from those toolkits is that interdisciplinary connection supporting ELA and ELD in the classroom. And so we're really starting this conversation and through these podcasts as a way to sort of envision what some of those much needed resources might be able to look like.
All right, it sounds like we're going to start meeting our superheroes. So I just want to introduce you a little bit to this project. As the state of California deepens its efforts to include environmental literacy in all content areas, the Cali ELA working group, we captured stories from the field. And so we collected stories from all over California, from TK through 12 educators who teach reading, writing, listening, and speaking through the lens of environmental literacy and justice, as a way to highlight what this type of work might look like in K-12 classrooms. We received applications from across the state, and we selected 4 classrooms to highlight: 1 kindergarten, 1 4th grade, 1 middle school, and 1 high school classroom. And I'm pleased to say that that all of the teachers who are part of this work are here today, so that's really exciting. We have a team member who's not really in the spotlight right now, but I want to give him major props. Cheney Munson. He interviewed all of our teachers that we selected and created a series of podcasts of what this work looks like in the classroom. And the stories are incredibly inspiring, and we're looking forward to sharing some excerpts with you. And the podcasts are going to be, if they're not yet, actually they are, they're live, and they are on the Cali website, so you can access them and listen to them. So yay.
In their entirety, yes. Amy just added the link to the chat.
Oh, I think we can go to the next one. Okay, so as you listen to these podcasts, just be thinking about what evidence do you hear of a deepening of engagement with ELA standards and skill building through these podcasts. You know, there's a lot of rationale for integration. You know, it engages students with real life issues of local and global significance. These stories are place-based. It invites students to interact with the natural environment, not only through science content, but through storytelling in multiple genres of literature and writing. It empowers students to think critically and creatively and in a solutionary way about effective forms of advocacy about environmental issues. And it also provides authentic audiences to which students can speak and write. And there are many, many other really important reasons why we do this work. So just listen for them as we go through our podcasts. And like I said before, each podcast will be housed on the CALI website under resources. And each podcast will also include snapshots, which are written pieces that will accompany the work.
The snapshots are not quite ready, but I believe Amy is queuing the drafts. They will be added to the website soon as they are formatted.
And the snapshots are based on the format for the California ELA ELD framework. So it paints a picture of classroom practice. We know that the ELA framework is the last framework revision that has not yet included environmental principles and concepts. So the snapshots are really just in the format of the ELD framework, ELA ELD framework, and those drafts will be, we actually have a link to the drafts if you want to take a look at those as well.
And I was going to ask Amy, do you want to say a little bit about how people can share thoughts and comments?
Well, just for now, because y'all are here today with us, if you do have a comment on the draft, we'll keep it open just for you guys, just for now, to shape our thinking on this before we officially take them through editing process and get them posted on the site.
Wonderful. Thank you. Really excited about thinking about this work, making it to California's framework.
All right, so we're going to start listening to some podcast clips. And the first one we're going to listen to is from fourth grade teacher Greg Guerra, place-based research, grant writing and restoration, fourth graders design and restore critical riparian habitat. Greg teaches reading, writing, listening, and speaking to his fourth graders at Union Street Charter School in Arcata, California. It's a very rural elementary school, and he simultaneously gets his students outside and lets them get their hands dirty. His ongoing restoration unit is in partnership with a land trust and a native plant nursery, and it asks students to research native flora, use database evidence and expert advice to justify and present their choices for the most beneficial and appropriate native plants for the project. Students also write a grant and then complete the restoration project. And Greg says it's a powerful way to tie kids to the land. We are part of this land and we are expected to care for it. So let's listen to a little piece.
We were looking to start our own restoration project with the Jacoby Creek Land Trust. They were really excited. They wanted to know what was involved and what was necessary. So we took them out to the site, and the executive director took us around and showed us the site. And I brought up the fact that obviously we're with the kids, after we looked at the site, we're going to need money for this. And I showed them a few grants, that local small grants that were available. And they helped write the application for one of the grants. There were 5 questions. And then in the winter of 2022, we actually won the grant. It was all total is about $3,500. And so my students did research as far as they went on CalFlora, which was it's a database that has all plants all over California, and they were able to specify the kind of site that was we were looking at. And we cross-referenced the list that we came up with CalFlora on Troy's list from Samara Restoration. We had a mix of, I had them get a mix of trees and shrubs and forbs, so all total, I think we purchased 200 plants. And then on top of that, we also purchased equipment that we needed. So Troy talked about the different kinds of, the mattocks and the shovels and the dibblers and all the different kinds of things that would be helpful for a restoration project, with the thinking being that I would continue doing this sort of stuff with fourth graders in the future.
Right.
So fourth graders researched, some of them researched tools, Some of them got a little bit more in the weeds, so to speak, with as far as plants are concerned. And the spring of 2022, we had the plants picked that we wanted to get. We had all the tools, that was all delivered. We went to Samara Restoration and got a tour of the plants that we were getting. And each one of my students also did, well, in small groups, they did presentations on the kinds of plants that they particularly wanted for, their part of the restoration. And so as a group, we narrowed down based on the presentations which plants we were going to get.
For that. Greg, you're in the room. Is there anything you want to add? I know that was just a short chunk of the clip, but if you want to maybe unmute and say a few words about what this project means for your students going forward, that would be lovely.
Sure. So that happened, that part of the restoration project happened a few years ago. I think we're now in the fourth, close to the fourth year of the restoration. I guess next fall will be the fourth winter, I think. And I've taken groups out since then, and we've gone and we've managed the restoration site. We've pulled back the field grass, and we put down weed mat. We put down cardboard and chips, and now we're doing weed mat. And it's been, and it's a longitudinal study, so to speak, because we've measured the heights and the widths of the plants, and we're taking pictures. Kids get their pictures taken next to the plants. So we're going to be able to see over the course of any number of years, for however much long I'm teaching, how the restoration site is doing. And I've had kids come back from schools, that have since left my school, because we're at K-5, and they've come back and asked me how things are going. And I think there's a couple of families have gone out and visited the site. So yeah, again, I think it was, I really like what Peggy had said earlier about kids taking action on these environmental issues. And that's really where my heart is. And I think taking this kind of action that was taken really helped develop a better connection to the land and where they're from, and help the kids in my class understand a little bit more about the natural community that's surrounding them. And so I think that's a really, really important part of this whole piece for me, is to help them develop a connection to where they live.
Could you say
And-
just a little, oh, sorry, Tara.
No, please, Peggy.
Could you say just a little bit about how it deepened ELA skill building or engagement?
Yeah, so the writing the grant certainly was really important. That was certainly an authentic audience. And then doing they did slideshow presentations based on what they had found out in Cal Flora. So they researched what plants would be appropriate. They put together a slideshow using Google Slide. They developed arguments as to why they thought these plants should be appropriate for our spot. And then we had a discussion after all the presentations were done. So there was definitely a lot of listening and speaking and arguing your point. And yeah, written work certainly as well. Writing the grant was really important. And then when we go out to the sites now, kids will reflect on what it looked like before in the pictures and what it looks like now, and how meaningful that is to them, knowing that they're helping this spot grow and thrive.
And I also imagine that there was a lot more motivation to write and to argue and to read when they have a real project that they're working on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. That they
work early, so now I get to repot my plants and clean up.
I didn't hear that. I'm sorry.
I think Sarah was just agreeing with you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And so, and honestly, what I would love to do, and I don't have, I'm involved in lots of different projects. But what I would love to do with this is to actually expand this into other sites and possibly bring other schools on board. That's kind of my long-term vision for this, because I think this was a really small scale, project. And I think it was perfect for fourth graders, the size. There was it was also, what was really great about this was there was a lot of community support, not just with the Jacoby Creek Land Trust, but Fish and Game had a grant. You can see in that picture where we're all standing together, there's a fence around the restoration sites. And that was made possible by a grant through Fish and Game, which was fantastic. And then not to mention the parents, you can see in that picture, there's quite a few adults. And so the restoration site isn't that far from my school, but we did have to do, field trips. So what was really also nice about it, it was just a really good community building event, not just with the people in our school, but with also organizations that are very active in our community.
Thanks so much, Greg, for chatting about your project a little bit more.
Happy to.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Okay, so next up we have August Fries, and August teaches in English in an urban multilingual high school district in the San Francisco Bay Area. And their place-based interdisciplinary climate justice speculative fiction writing unit asks students to bring in a more imaginative lens to address environmental racism and the climate crisis. So the project is long, but the task in their class is to write a story with a setting and a problem that is grounded in a local environmental issue. And then students solve that problem in an imaginative way through narrative writing. And from August's perspective, the speculative fiction unit is not only empowering, but very motivating for struggling writers. And the guiding question is, how can I contribute to an overall environmentally just world? And so let's hear a piece of that podcast.
I was just going to add to that introduction that this was also an interdisciplinary unit planned in conjunction with a history teacher colleague.
The arc of it was, okay, we're leading towards speculative fiction in English class. The hope was to have there be this more practical lens in history. And that was kind of my suggestion of like, I want there to be something that's like really pragmatic and something that's like immediate and, direct, and then something else that is imaginative and creative, because I think that those are two of the main like camps of people that I know, or like tactics that I feel like people take. And sometimes it's one or the other. And I'm very much like we need to do all of it kind of person. The task was to write a story that was grounded in reality and based in reality of things that are true. In this case, students choosing a case study that they learned about in history that they then solved the problem for in an imaginative way. So this idea was to say, like, we're writing a story in a world like the world we have now, in which climate change is a real problem. And the speculative or imaginative element of that was intended to be like, I want you all to think about what solutions you've learned about and what solutions you could think of in which you could create a narrative for characters to imagine a future where this problem gets solved, basically.
Give a couple examples of the case studies and the problems that students were learning about. And then could you give a couple of examples of some of the stories that students ended up writing about and some of the solutions they incorporated?
So the case studies were basically, they chose between two different ones in history class. A lot of what was happening in history class was students learning about like redlining and city planning and things that are kind of like, yes, that's climate related. And also that's related to like, there's kind of all these other elements of it, right? And talking about environmental racism, a case study of West Oakland and air pollution, or a case study of radioactive contamination in the Bayview. And so they didn't have to base their stories in those places, but they did have to choose one of those issues and say, like, I'm focusing on air pollution, or I'm focusing on like radioactive soil contamination kind of stuff.
So August, I think that you're in the room as well. So maybe you can speak a little bit to what the ways in which this project motivated your struggling writers, or anything else you want to talk about that that calls to mind how powerful it is to have solutionary climate action as a lens for teaching ELA.
Yeah, for sure. So I feel like at the school that I work at, a lot of times the kind of standard assignment for a student, and maybe it's true for many schools, is very structured, like expository essay, doing some analysis, like putting together evidence, kind of like the TEA or ABC, whatever kind of paragraph, rubric that you use or are familiar with. And so that's what we started the year with. And students do get a lot of practice with that type of writing throughout the year. And one of the things that felt important to me for this unit was to divert a little bit from that type of writing and allow students to do something that is more creative, especially because we were trying to have that practical element in the history class. And so I think that what ended up happening, and I wasn't sure, I have never taught this unit before, but what ended up happening is that I think there were a lot of students who had struggled to produce writing in the more expository writing environment, that then I think we're able to come up with ideas and kind of like cultivate some side of them that I think hadn't been represented yet in the school year, and that we're able to like tap into some imaginative part of them, which for me was really exciting to see because it almost felt like selfish to do this assignment. Like I'd rather read a speculative fiction story for my students than an essay where they analyze the pieces of Always Running that relate to education. I felt like this is going to be really cool. And I was excited that students were able to connect with it and find something that they could relate to in the assignment. And I think that for me, it very much relates to the kind of philosophy of like all organizing is science fiction per Adrienne Marie Brown's kind of style, being like, we have to imagine the world that we want, or else how could we possibly build it?
In the podcast, you actually tell a story that is just wonderful, and maybe you can briefly recap it. It was a story about a student who was producing very little writing, and this project actually got them to over that hump to produce more writing. Maybe you can just share a little bit about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I talk about my student MJ, who is an emergent bilingual student, and is someone that this was our kind of like last unit of the fall semester. So I'd kind of seen their growth throughout those couple earlier marking periods, and seeing that the more analytical writing was difficult for them. And then kind of coming into this unit, I felt like they were able to, produce a lot more writing and do it in a style that really surprised me. As I speak about in the podcast, the kind of implicit assumption that I had that most of the students would, I had assumed that students would write with humans as their characters. I never said like you have to, but that's what I imagined. And then for this student, they wrote about their main characters as a cat and a highway that were having a conversation with each other, where the cat's like looking out the window and the highway is like coughing and is kind of upset, and totally embodied the concepts that I wanted them to, and address the pollution and kind of checked all the boxes, if you will, of what I was hoping for, but did it in this, for me, really unconventional way that felt really interesting to me, and felt like, okay, yeah, that's not what I was expecting, but that's awesome. Thanks for writing it.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, August.
Thanks.
Thank you. And I love the interdisciplinary collaboration.
All right. So next we're going to hear from Maribel Araya-Circul. Her unit is a middle school unit. She teaches in ELA, and the podcast showcases an interdisciplinary argumentative reading, writing, listening, and speaking unit that asks students to grapple with who should take responsibility for corporate environmental degradation, specifically in the fast fashion shoes and jeans industry. And she really starts with where her students are at and what their interests are, and then engages students with a variety of texts, and students use those texts to formulate verbal and written arguments about the topic. At the end of the unit, students create a social media real ecological call to action using Canva.
I started off with just thinking about media consumption and thinking about what music students are listening to, and priming them and probing them by introducing them to artists who are already creating these calls of action in their music. So artists old and new, like Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, Michael Jackson's Earth Song, someone a little bit more contemporary like Childish Gambino, Feels Like Summer. And so Billie Eilish. So there was like a lot of different ways that I was thinking about engaging students. And then particularly last school year, I decided, okay, I'm going to be a little bit more explicit about doing this other than this unit on creating consciousness through lyrics. With the help, after I got involved with the writing project at my site at UCLA, I got then informed of the Environmental Literacy, Environmental Justice California Writing Project. And so the work that they were doing like helped continued my specific like ideas on how I would move forward with that. And so I started to write curriculum where students would learn about jeans and sneakers and thinking about like what are the outsourcing people are doing and how is it affecting globally people's health. So more racial justice and social justice, and that housed under environmental justice. How's it affecting their employment, their health, the ecosystems with jeans, the dyeing of the jeans going into the water, polluting. And then they created, so we did a deep dive with the ELA piece and then creating a call to action using multimedia with reels. It's like I really thought about it interdisciplinary.
Yeah.
So even though I was last year I was primarily ELA, which was my college readiness class, I still thought about how do I put sciences in here without being a science teacher.
Thank you. Marivelle is in the room, and I just want to say Marivelle and I first met through the California Writing Project, Environmental Literacy and Justice Collaborative that's on its 3rd year. So Marivelle, do you want to jump in and maybe tell us a little bit more about the unit or some ahas or surprises about teaching the English language arts standards through this unit?
Yeah, thank you. You know, just the starting off with talking about what's relevant in middle school. A lot of it is consumption, like what do children, middle school students really love? They love their sneakers, they love their jeans. And at the school that I'm at, where we had to wear a uniform. And so wearing jeans was a big, it was a really big show and tell if you could wear, you know, distressed jeans. And so once I asked students to just start off with one group where we looked at shoes, like where are your shoes from? And they saw that it wasn't local, it was outsourced. And so that kind of started the conversation of just the talking and the listening. And then showing them videos through TED Ed, the complexities of the sneakers. I thought students were really brought in and they kind of leaned in a little bit more and wanted to know more once I gave them articles. And there was this engagement and this really positive tension of deciding in their middle school brain of like what's right and wrong, like whose true responsibility is it going to be between, if we're going to say, is it corporate, is it or consumer? And so then they got really into the nuance, and then they were looking into how can I take this apart. When I did the jeans and they saw that it really affected ecosystems like with water, then they were their thinking started to percolate and think about even more nuance, because at the end of that whole conversation of whose responsibility is it, there's the answer for me is going to be that there just needs to be a balance, a harmony of policies set in place, but also there needs to be accountability in communities and also the global community. But then they also started to see that there were also possibilities us as consumers that we could take on as like repurposing, buying thrift versus buying new. And then they started to see all that when we watched more videos and read more articles. And so if anything, like this unit really brought this conversation of what they could talk about in their social peer groups, which I didn't feel like it was happening until I started introducing, where are your sneakers coming from? What will you do with them after? Where are your jeans coming from? And what will you do with it after? And so because of that, there was this fieriness between students who were already engaged in school, but also because the topic was so accessible to what gave them social clout, that it was easy to get into the conversation, because when I started the unit, it was just to talk about it as a Socratic seminar, like what are connections, wonders, and word roadblocks that is helping you or limiting you from understanding. And because the topic was, again, like so accessible, students then felt like they needed to take a side. Who truly is responsible for the mess of fast fashion? And so anyways, moving forward, showing them how large it is and how much trash gets or products get pushed into other developing countries. I think that was a really great entry point to helping them understand ecological impact and also just personal impact on the global community. Yeah.
Thanks, Maribel. And you also got your kids debating and talking about the text that you were introducing them to, which seems like it was really highly motivating. And your stories in the podcast about your students and their debates were joyful to listen to. Thanks, Maribel.
And I just love, as we're going into our final podcast, to think about both the academic appropriateness of engaging in environmental literacy through the ELA lens and ways that it deepens that engagement. But also, I really appreciated, Maribel, how you mentioned sort of the developmental level or stage that students are in when it comes to their brain as well. And middle school being that very early, teasing out of right and wrong and nuance and complexities, and just such an amazing way to engage that developmentally at a number of levels and layers there. Thank you.
All right, so
the perfect transition for this.
Yeah, so we're going to go backwards and talk about a kindergarten classroom that's doing this work. And Taft Wilson and Melanie Smith are kindergarten teachers in Fresno in a high needs elementary school that emphasizes content integration. And they, in their podcast, they talk about their Monarch Butterfly unit and the ways that they engage their students in literacy standards while building empathy and saving butterflies. And so there's a lot of social emotional learning in this unit, and it's all around the conservation of monarch butterflies, emphasizing the role of milkweed plants in their life cycle. And so these kindergartners are doing research, they're engaging in storytelling and art projects, real world advocacy, and it's really a journey from classroom inquiry to community action, and involves a partnership with the local zoo.
We're all unique in the way that our love of learning is really captured and comes alive. And so I feel like doing this work and being interdisciplinary gives lots of students opportunities to connect with what we're learning and many ways to represent their learning. I will say, like, thinking about a specific student who was having a hard time and who, understandable, at the beginning of kindergarten, did not want to come and told me every day school isn't fun. This isn't fun. I just want to play. And the longer, the more days that went on, like, he began to see, like, and it really was that monarch unit that really, like, when we started talking about monarchs, that really captivated him. And he stopped wanting to walk away and go play with the blocks. He wanted to be a part of the conversation. And he wanted to be a part of reading and learning because he began to really care about something. And so there was just a spark lit in his heart because he began to see, well, one, learning is fun and learning is engaging, but also learning matters. And it really captivated his passion. And now he loves talking about the monarchs. Like, then he very quickly became one of the students that was like, would get mad if I didn't call on him because he was so excited to share what he was learning and he didn't want to miss out. I mean, today he was upset with me because he missed out on learning when he went to the bathroom and he wanted us to restart the whole conversation so he could be a part of it because he had a thought to share. So I think there is, when students connect their learning to something meaningful and something where they know that they are making a difference, then they're invested and there's more ownership of their learning. Yeah,
and just to add to that, utilizing the environment as a lens for education has really allowed the students that may have had like large behaviors. Like I had a student, particularly at the beginning of the school year, like I was like, oh, because she was laying down, she wouldn't sit up. And I was like, sweetheart, you gotta sit up. She's like, this is so boring. I don't want to be in school. And I'm like, well, we just sat down. Like, you didn't even know me yet, you know? And she's kind of like, And she, every time I would open a book, she's like, oh, again. And then now she's a student that sits in the front of the class. She led most of the conversation on the Monarch unit. She could narrate the entire like piece of like, first there was a lot of butterflies, and then there was less, and then there was even less, and then there was more, and there was only more because people started planting milkweed. And she went off on a tangent, and she was able to explain it to anyone. And now it's like, are we going to the zoo? What are we learning about? Oh, which animal are we learning about now? Like, and she wants to know, and she's very hungry for the knowledge. So I think when it's something that now she can touch at her fingertips. And one thing we didn't say is,
okay. And, oh gosh, what a joyful podcast. And, the unit ends, the students actually have to present their research and their desire for milkweed plants. They had to present to the zoo, they had to present to their school, and they had to present to the zoo. And so they had an opportunity to present their work. Melanie, are you in the room? Would you like to hop on and say a few things that we haven't heard from your short podcast clip?
Yes, I'm here. So it was an amazing journey and an amazing unit. I think the things that we said, like, it just really captivated the hearts and minds of students. And I feel like what has been said about how the environmental education piece really captivating students and drawing them in to the work of reading and writing, and just that it really truly does give students such a deep passion. And we watched it with kindergartners, that when students have a purpose behind reading and behind writing, then they're really excited to read and write, even as 5-year-olds. And when I'm saying writing, like, they're actually putting their pencils to paper and they are writing out their own, or students had to write their own informational text. So after doing lots of research for a variety of reasons, one, to like build their own knowledge, but also to have the knowledge to go advocate for that space for a monarch way station and a pollinator garden. They had to do all the research to be able to persuade the zoo, this is why you should do this. This is why this matters. And this is how you need to do it. So they also were reading text on how you need to plant all the things that monarchs need to survive throughout their entire life cycle. And then what the milkweed plants actually need. And so you had these kindergartners that were using words like, they could tell you how many milkweed leaves an individual caterpillar needs. They were asking for, we need yarrow and we need zinnias, and we need, like, they could name all the pollinator plants because we'd been reading about them. And they then had to take all that and write a persuasive letter, whole class, to advocate for that space. And they did use speaking and listening skills to have to present that to the zoo and say, this is why you should do this, and this is how you need to do this. And they had really big opinions about what that space needed to look like, because they were deeply invested in what these monarchs needed. And then they had to take all of that. They wrote their own informational text to share all of their knowledge, because our big conversation throughout the unit was, we kept asking them this question, like, as scientists, if we do all this research, but we don't ever share it, does change happen? And so, like, they learn, and they could talk very, articulate very clearly, like, no, we have to share our knowledge, otherwise change doesn't happen. And so then talking about, who do you want to share this knowledge with? And so then our unit ends with a presentation where they actually present to their families and presented their monarch way station. And you, again, had to use all the speaking and listening skills to share with their families and with the community that showed up to represent all of their knowledge, all of their learning that they'd gathered.
I feel like that is the absolute perfect transition Because if we don't share our knowledge, if we don't share our learning and our understanding, just like the four of you have today, change doesn't happen, right? And that's the initiative that we're trying to launch today with the Superheroes program, is being change agents ourselves as well. So what we want from all of you is for you to think deeply about what environmental literacy looks like in your own classroom, resources you might want to share, resources that you know of that you think other people need to hear more about, because we are putting together collections and stories from the field to be able to showcase both all of you and all of your learning, but also show a template of what the possibilities and potential are like and the impacts this might be able to have. So if you have an ELA superhero story, we want to hear from all of you. We're going to be building out this website on Cali to share additional resources and snapshots, and thinking about the launch of the revisions of the ELA framework, and including the environmental principles and concepts, really steeping this work in environmental literacy and justice at a local level on a global scale. So we want to learn from all of you. We want to hear from all of you. But in addition, we also want to share some resources as a takeaway for all of you. We put together some resources, Tara and I, in just thinking about both understanding writing, speaking, and listening resources, engaging in environmental literacy, our go-tos at the primary and secondary level, but also what some of the research shows. But we would also love to hear what we have missed and what might be added and what we should share with people more broadly. So Amy has put all of those links in the chat for you. We are almost out of time, so I want to thank all of you. But if you want to click on those links and open them up, and we would love to hear from all of you in thinking about what stories we need to capture next, what resources we need to share. Because like those kindergartners taught us, right? If we don't share out our knowledge, change doesn't happen. So thank you all for coming today. Thank you to all of my Cali partners, and a special thank you to our ELA superheroes for volunteering your time and participating in this amazing project. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day.